Hello, today I want to talk about veteran duelists. Veteran duelists make up, I believe, a significant portion of the Yugi community, but is a group of duelists that I don't think really are addressed all that often. Now, we have our newbie duelists, we have the beginner duelists who are just trying to play Yu-Gi-Oh for the first time. We have the competitive duelists, who are players who are actively competing in the competitive scene or keep up with what the meta is going on or with what's currently happening in the competitive Yu-Gi-Oh scene in terms of like what's meta, what isn't meta. And then we have veteran duelists. And when I talk about veteran duelists, I'm gonna describe the specific type of duelists that played Yu-Gi-Oh for X amount of years. And this could be like, I played Yu-Gi-Oh between 2005 to 2008, or I played Yu-Gi-Oh between 2010 to 2017, or I played Yu-Gi-Oh in 2014 to 2016. These are the duelists that I'm talking about specifically. And these duelists will claim themselves to be quote unquote veteran duelists. And it is considered kind of a joke within the community now that whenever a Yu-Gi-Oh player considers themselves a veteran, usually you're not meant to take them seriously. You really don't. Most top players, whether you talk to like Jesse Cotton or a Pack or Joshua Smith, or even like players who have played the game for years, like a Far for an MBT, they're gonna say, "Oh, I consider myself an experienced duelist," or "I consider myself somebody who's played the game for a couple of years," or "I consider myself to be somebody who knows a little bit about the game of Yu-Gi-Oh." Most of them will not say, "I consider myself to be a veteran duelist." And the reason for that is because the term veteran duelist has a negative connotation to it. And those connotations apply to something I'm going to describe later on right now. And it's that veteran duelists have these three things that hold them back from being those who struggle taking the next step forward into being competitive players. They are not active in the community. They are not in a positive circle that pushes for improvement. And also they play to feel good, but they don't play to get better. Now, you don't have to be competitive if you don't want to. The game of Yu-Gi-Oh has so many ways for you to enjoy. You can enjoy the game through the art. You can enjoy the game through buying and selling. You can enjoy the game through just purely through Masterduels. You can enjoy the game through the competitive scene. There are many ways to play Yu-Gi-Oh that satisfies what you enjoy from the game. But the issue though with veteran duelists is the fact that they do something within the community that is just, I believe, is a lot more harmful than it is good. In the sense that we got these players here who are either A, being complete negative Nancy's to the game, or B, they give advice or information to people that's completely inaccurate, and they do something that is toxic, or they push away some new players, or they talk smack about competitive players. They're in this in-between line where they're knowledgeable enough about the game that they cannot be called newbies, but yet they're not good enough in the game to be considered somebody whose opinion should be taken with all seriousness within the competitive scene of Yu-Gi-Oh. So what are veteran duelists then? Like what's a good thing about being a veteran duelist? And so when it comes to veteran duelists, I said that they are not active in the community. An issue that veteran duelists have is that they played the game for X amount of years, and then they leave, and then when they come back into the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, they just see what the game has evolved, but they don't ask questions. They don't play with other people who are playing within the meta that they are trying to participate in. A lot of veteran duelists played some competitive or played Playground Yu-Gi-Oh or played locals back in like years gone, like over a decade ago or 7 years ago. And then when they try to get back in the game, they don't actively play with other people who are knowledgeable about the format that they're in. They're too stuck with the format of the past. So a person who was stuck playing Dragon Ruler's format or a Zodiac format, and then they go to 2023, they're going to have all these questions about what Yu-Gi-Oh is. But instead of asking those questions, they're just going to walk away and be like, "Oh man, the game is terrible for what it is right now. I hate link monsters, or I hate synchro monsters, or I hate pendulums." I think to avoid moments like that, these quote-unquote veteran duelists need to ask questions, be open-minded, and participate within the community so they can assimilate properly into what is happening right now in the current format. The thing with newbie players though is that newbie players, in order for them to enjoy the game, they have to dive in into somewhat of the competitive scene, or they have to do some research, or they have to do some studying to get into Yu-Gi-Oh, because their first step into Yu-Gi-Oh is what is happening actively in the current format. For veteran duelists, their mind frame is stuck like in Duel Monsters era, in GOAT formats, or in 2010 or 2011, and because they're stuck in that framework of what they believe Yu-Gi-Oh is, they are not open and minded enough to recognize what the differences are, or what the new things that envelop when it comes to the game or the evolution of the game. Newbie players don't really have to deal with that. Some of them watched Yu-Gi-Oh when they were a little kid or played in the playground, but they're not so enveloped into that old format that they are not willing to not recognize what's happening in the new format. For veteran duelists, it was like, oh man, ABCs were so awesome and we're so good and we're so strong. And then they go to 2023 or 2022 and they'd be like, ABC is still strong. And if you're not playing ABCs, then like you suck or something above that line. I know it sounds ridiculous, but there legitimately are still people who, because they played an old format, still believe that those old format cards are good, because logically speaking, those were the cards that were pushed to being good back then, and they don't understand what's happening in the current game. And then I put down here, they are not in a positive circle that pushes for improvement. One issue that I found with veteran duelists is that because, and this goes in hand with people who don't actively participate in the community, in the sense that and Pax has mentioned this about when he made the transition from being a casual player to a competitive player, and it's that if you are in a social circle surrounded by people who are willing to push you, who are willing to see you improve, then you yourself will improve. If you're somebody who wants to become a better duelist in Yu-Gi-Oh, and you're surrounded by other people who want to be good duelists also in Yu-Gi-Oh, you can all push each other, and you can become better together. That's where a lot of these like Yu-Gi-Oh teams come from. These Yu-Gi-Oh teams, like Luxury Gaming, is just comprised of friends who got together and learned how to improve and become better in the game, playing one another. And this goes to my third point here about veteran duelists, is that a lot of them play to feel good, not to play to get better. A lot of people have a tendency of doing things not to improve, but to make themselves, or to push like dopamine in their brains, that they feel good in that present moment though. You're not thinking like steps in advance. You're not thinking like, how will me doing this make me better later on? They're just thinking, I just want satisfaction right now. Like, instead of long-term building, instead of long-term development, instead of taking it step by step, they're like, what can I do right now to make myself feel good right now? That's an issue that a lot of veteran duelists have. So this goes back to, like, let's say something like, what's the old deck? Necros. Let's go with Necros as an example here. So somebody who played Necros in the early to mid 2010s, they be playing Necros, and then when they go play it in the current format they're in, you recognize, oh man, Necros sucks. So now that you recognize how Necros sucks, the logical thing to do is to go and ask for help. But in order to ask for help, that must mean you have to put yourself in a position of vulnerability. And a lot of people in general, this doesn't just apply to Yu-Gi-Oh, but in general, people don't want to be put in a position of vulnerability. So what do you do instead? That Necros player, instead of asking for help, will then go and play with somebody who is quote unquote another veteran duelist, or another worse option, a newbie duelist, and then they'll play Necros against those people, and then their Necros deck will work perfectly fine, and they'll etch out a couple win or two. But the problem though is that they will halt the progress of the newbie duelist, and it's going to give them a weird framework or a weird mindset that's detached from reality of what Yu-Gi-Oh is. That's why we have a lot of veteran duelists who will give quote unquote some like advice or provide some mentorship, or will provide a take or perspective on Yu-Gi-Oh that is objectively and clearly wrong, but because they played X amount of years in an old format, their philosophies they still believe still applies today, and they can share something that is inaccurate but they believe is correct because in their time frame it was correct. And so because that they're trying to play to feel good, they feel comfortable in that situation where they can go and pick on weaker duelists, they can go pick on newbie players, or they can go and have like a weird pissing contest with other quote unquote veteran duelists who have a weird fixated way as to how a person can go and play Yu-Gi-Oh. I'm not saying you can't enjoy all formats. If you enjoy 2010 format, you should be able to feel free to be like, yeah, man, like I'm playing 2010 format, or hey, I enjoy 2015 format, or I enjoy GOAT format, or I enjoy hat format. You're perfectly in the right to do that, but you are in the wrong when you say my format's the only way how Yu-Gi-Oh should be played, and any other format around that outside of that is wrong. And it leads to a point where veteran duelists, this is like the big hurdle as to why veteran duelists can't make the simulation or take the next step towards competitive, and it's that because that they're playing to feel good, they will never be in a position where, and because they're not in the community actively, because they're not in a positive social circle, because they're not playing to get better, they are stuck in this weird weird limbo where they don't want to improve, they can't improve, and anything that tries to push them to actually improve will just scare them away. And that's the issue in lines with veteran duelists. A lot of them are complacent. And any efforts or attempt to like either to correct them or for you to say that, hey, like what you're doing is not right, you know, picking on newbie duelists, or you giving out bad advice, or you telling someone something that's completely inaccurate, that's just gonna make them recede and not further push towards the competitive dueling aspect of things. There is a lot of toxicity when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! I get that, but a lot of this toxicity comes from players who consider themselves to be quote-unquote veteran duelists. And the more I believe that the community does in trying to create like an inviting circle for these veteran duelists to be like, hey, it's okay, don't worry, I can help you, I think the community will be in a lot more better place. But at the same time, though, there are a lot of quote-unquote veteran duelists out there who will interact with other quote-unquote veteran duelists, and it will continue to push the cycle of toxicity, the cycle of misinformation. It will continue to push for like very negative people within the community that will scare away either newbie players or will provide a false misrepresentation of what the competitive scene is. We have a lot of veteran duelists out there who fake and pretend to be competitive duelists when they actually weren't. A lot of these players don't have a single top, or don't actually participate in the community, or they have a small circle or a small group of like 2 to maybe 3 or 4 friends, and they play one specific style, and then they they actively avoid not participating in other styles. That is an issue when it comes to Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think if more people are able to address these veteran duelists or call them out on it, and don't let them just continue to be complacent, I do believe that the Yu community can make further steps into becoming more better, into becoming more progressive, and we can further expand this already growing community. So veteran duelists, I say, if you really are somebody who wants to take the actual next steps and you want to improve as a duelist and be part of the Yu community, you have to be open to putting your shield down and being a little bit more vulnerable. I get it, we all, but I just have to point something out here. All right then, so a lot of veteran duelists have a tendency of doing this where they're like, oh, the reason why I'm not actively participating in the competitive scene is because I have a life. Okay, you know, like less than like 1% of Yu-Gi-Oh players do play Yu-Gi-Oh full time as an actual job. You all know that, right? Like 99.9% of duelists who top in YCSs, top in nationals, top in like regionals, top in like tournaments, all this stuff, actually, a lot of them happen to be married or be in a relationship or have a family or have an active career. A lot of us, not all of them, like you will rarely in your entire lifetime find anybody who will say the words, I play Yu-Gi-Oh full time as a career and as a job. You're almost not going to see that all that much, really. Like the MBTs, the Farfas, that just see Cotton, the Packs out there in the world. Like Pack actually still works an active job. Pack is one of the best Yu-Gi-Oh players out there in the world. Yet the dude has like, he still works like a 9-to-5 job. There's this misrepresentation of competitive players being like full-time competitive players when it's not true. The reason why veteran duelists don't want to be competitive players is because they just want to find some excuse or some reason as to why they are incapable of taking the next step forward, when in reality it's just themselves holding themselves back. That really is the honest truth about veteran duelists.